Morning sky above Nevada stretched endlessly blue, unmarked by even the faintest wisp of cloud when Captain Sarah Chen first spotted the anomaly on her radar screen. Flying at 38,000 feet in her F-22 Raptor, she was leading a routine training formation with 3 other pilots when the contact appeared, a single blip moving at impossible speeds, executing maneuvers that defied every law of aerodynamics she'd learned in her 15 years as a fighter pilot. "Thunder lead. This is Thunder 2, crackled Lieutenant Martinez's voice through her helmet comm. "You seeing what I'm seeing on scope?" Sarah's grip tightened on the stick as she watched the unknown aircraft perform a 90-degree vertical climb that should have torn any conventional plane apart. The G-forces alone would have liquefied a human pilot, yet whatever was up there moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, leaving behind a vapor trail unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. Instead of the familiar white contrail that marked the passage of jet engines, this craft painted the sky with ribbons of silver that seemed to shimmer and pulse with their own internal light. "Thunder flight. Maintain formation and vector 270, she commanded, her training taking over even as her mind struggled to process what her instruments were telling her. "Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force Thunder Lead. You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came not through radio waves but as a sensation that seemed to bypass her ears entirely, flowing directly into her consciousness like water finding its level. It wasn't words exactly, more like emotions and images cascading through her mind, vast distances crossed in the blink of an eye, stars that pulsed with colors beyond the human spectrum, and an overwhelming sense of loss that made her throat constrict with unexpected grief. The unknown craft began to descend, and Sarah felt her breath catch as it came into visual range. It was unlike any aircraft in any military's arsenal, a sleek, organic shape that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury given form. Its surface didn't merely reflect light, it seemed to absorb it, bend it, and release it in patterns that hurt to look at directly. But it was the way it moved that truly unnerved her. There was no thrust signature, no heat bloom that should accompany such incredible acceleration. It simply existed in one position and then another, as if the space between was optional. "Jesus Christ," whispered Captain Rodriguez from Thunder 4, his voice tight with awe and fear. "What the hell is that thing?" Sarah was about to respond when her radar screen lit up with new contacts, a full squadron of F-22s vectoring in from 3 directions, their transponder codes identifying them as birds from Nellis, Langley, and Peterson. Someone very high up, the chain of command, had taken notice of their uninvited guest, and they weren't taking any chances. Within minutes, the unknown craft found itself at the center of a slowly tightening noose of America's most advanced fighter jets. But if the alien pilot was concerned about being outnumbered 12-1, it didn't show. The craft continued its leisurely descent, leaving that strange, luminous trail in its wake. Sarah found herself studying that vapor trail with growing fascination. There was something familiar about its pattern, something that tugged at the edges of her memory like a half-remembered song. "All flights, this is Reaper Lead," came a new voice over the tactical frequency. Colonel James Morrison, Sarah recognized, one of the Air Force's most decorated pilots. "Weapons tight, repeat, weapons tight. We observe and report only until key. Further notice." The alien craft leveled off at 25,000 feet and began to fly in what appeared to be a holding pattern. But Sarah soon realized it was something far more complex. The ship was tracing intricate geometric shapes in the sky, each turn and bank perfectly calculated, each curve flowing seamlessly into the next. The vapor trail it left behind began to form a pattern, not random contrails dissipating in the wind, but a deliberate design that grew more elaborate with each passing minute. As Sarah watched, mesmerized despite her training, she began to make out individual elements within the grand design. Here, a series of loops that spiraled inward, like a nautilus shell. There, a collection of straight lines that intersected at precise angles, forming what looked almost like letters? No, not letters exactly, but symbols of some kind. Alien hieroglyphs written across the canvas of the sky in light and vapor. The other pilots were reporting in, their voices tense with confusion and barely controlled fear. This was beyond their training, beyond their experience, beyond anything in their operational manuals. They were fighter pilots trained to identify threats and neutralize them, but what do you do when faced with something that operates by rules you don't understand, wielding technology that makes your most advanced weapons look like stone tools? Sarah found herself drawn forward, her F-22 unconsciously edging closer to the alien craft as if pulled by some invisible force. The vapor trail was hypnotic in its complexity, and she could swear she was beginning to see patterns within patterns, meanings buried in the swirling silver mist. Her training screamed at her to maintain distance, to follow protocol, but something deeper, some instinct she couldn't name, urged her to look closer, to understand. The alien ship seemed to sense her approach and began to alter its flight path, not aggressively but almost welcomingly. It was insane to think in such terms about a potential threat, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the craft was trying to communicate with her specifically. The vapor trail began to change as well, becoming more intricate, more urgent in its silent message. And then, in a moment of clarity that would haunt her for the rest of her life, Sarah understood what she was looking at. The pattern in the sky wasn't random alien writing or some incomprehensible symbol. It was a formation diagram, the same type of flight pattern she'd memorized in training, had practiced countless times with her own squadron. But this wasn't any standard Air Force formation. This was something else entirely, something older and more tragic. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she felt the blood drain from her face as the pieces fell into place. The loops and curves, the precise spacing, the way certain elements of the pattern seemed to be missing, incomplete. It was the signature of a formation that had tried to stay together even as it fell apart, even as individual craft were lost, one by one to forces beyond their control. "My God," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "It's not writing. It's a memorial." Sarah's revelation sent ice through her veins, but before she could fully process its implications, the alien craft began to change its behavior in ways that defied all logic. The ship started to flicker, not like a malfunction, but rhythmically, deliberately, like a lighthouse beacon cutting through fog. With each pulse, the vapor trail behind it shifted colors, cycling through silver to gold to a deep, sorrowful blue that reminded Sarah of twilight over Arlington Cemetery. "Thunder Lead, you're drifting out of formation." Rodriguez's voice cut through her trance, but Sarah barely heard him. She was transfixed by what she was witnessing in the sky above. The alien craft had begun to split, not breaking apart or suffering mechanical failure, but deliberately dividing itself into multiple forms, each one smaller than the original, but moving with the same impossible grace. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 7. 7 ships, flying in perfect formation, their combined vapor trails now painting a pattern Sarah recognized with a chill that reached her bones. It was Delta Formation, the classic 7-ship diamond that had been the signature of the Thunderbirds demonstration team for decades. But there was something wrong with it, something that made her heart race with a mixture of recognition and dread. The formation was incomplete. The lead ship kept jerking, slightly to the left, as if trying to make room for an 8th aircraft that simply wasn't there. The slot position, traditionally the most dangerous spot in any formation, remained conspicuously empty, and Sarah watched in growing horror as the 7 ships continued their aerial dance around the ghost of their fallen comrade. Her hands trembling on the controls, Sarah accessed her aircraft's historical database, her fingers flying over the keypad as she searched for something she prayed she wouldn't find. But there it was, buried in the military records she'd studied but tried never to dwell upon. July 15, 1967. The day 8 F-105 Thunder Chiefs of the 355th Tactical Fighter Squadron had taken off from Tak Lee Royal Thai Air Force Base on a routine mission over North Vietnam. Only 7 had returned. Captain Michael "Iceman" Kowalski, flying Thunder Chief 62-4387, had been hit by surface-to-air missiles while protecting a downed pilot. His aircraft had spiraled into the jungle canopy, and despite extensive search efforts, neither he nor his plane had ever been recovered. For 58 years he had been listed as missing in action, presumed dead, a ghost that haunted the squadron histories and the dreams of the men who had flown beside him. But somehow, impossibly, the alien craft above her seemed to know this story. As Sarah watched, the 7 ships began to perform maneuvers that matched exactly the flight patterns described in the after-action reports from that long-ago mission. They flew as if they were still searching, still calling out to their lost wingman across the decades, their formation a prayer written in vapor and starlight. "All flights, this is Control." Colonel Morrison's voice crackled with tension. "Be advised, we're tracking multiple unknown contacts now. Maintain observation protocols and do not, repeat, do not, engage without direct authorization." But Sarah wasn't listening to the radio chatter anymore. She was remembering something her grandfather had told her years ago, back when she was just a kid dreaming of becoming a pilot. He'd been a crew chief with the 355th, had worked on those very Thunder Chiefs, had watched them take off on that final mission. He'd never talked much about the war, but on quiet evenings when the bourbon made him philosophical, he'd tell her about Iceman Kowalski, how the man had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, how he'd saved 3 pilots' lives before, that last, fatal flight. He was supposed to rotate home the next week, her grandfather had said, staring into the fire. Had a girl waiting for him in Chicago, plans to get married in the fall, but he wouldn't leave his squadron. Said they were his brothers, and brothers don't abandon each other. The old man had wiped his eyes then, not caring that she saw. "Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, still flying, still trying to get back to his formation." The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she felt tears streaming down her cheeks inside her helmet. Somehow, through technology beyond human understanding, through forces that transcended death itself, Iceman Kowalski had found his way home. The alien craft wasn't alien at all, she realized with stunning clarity. It was him. It was Michael, transformed by 58 years in the void between worlds, changed by experiences no human mind could comprehend, but still bound by the unbreakable bonds of squadron loyalty. As if responding to her recognition, the formation of 7 ships suddenly turned toward Sarah's F-22, and she felt that strange, wordless communication flow through her mind again. This time, however, the images were clearer, more focused. She saw flashes of an incredible journey, a consciousness torn from a dying aircraft and pulled across impossible distances, through dimensions where time flowed backward and stars sang, lullabies to sleeping planets. She saw Michael Kowalski learning to exist in forms of energy and light, mastering technologies that could reshape matter with a thought, but never forgetting the simple human need to return to those he'd left behind. The 7 ships began to descend, and Sarah realized with mounting excitement and terror that they were heading directly for her position. Her instrument panel lit up with warnings as the craft approached, but not the kind of warnings she'd expected. Instead of weapons locks or targeting signatures, her systems were detecting something else entirely. Energy patterns that seemed to interface directly with her aircraft's computers, downloading information at speeds that should have fried every circuit in her F-22. Flight manuals appeared on her screens, but not for any aircraft she recognized. Technical specifications for craft that could fold space-time like origami, navigate by starlight, and travel distances that would take conventional ships millennia to cross. And underneath it all, a message that bypassed her instruments entirely and spoke directly to her heart. "Help me get home. Thunder Lead, you need to break away now." Martinez's voice was sharp with alarm. "Your bird's lighting up like a Christmas tree on our scopes." But Sarah couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the impossible sight unfolding around her. The 7 ships had formed a protective circle around her F-22, and she realized that Michael, or whatever he had become, wasn't trying to threaten or abduct her. He was trying to recruit her. The downloads flooding her aircraft weren't attacks. They were job offers, applications to join the most exclusive squadron in the universe. The lost pilots who had found each other in the darkness between worlds and dedicated their existence to a single, sacred mission. Finding the others. Bringing them home. Sarah's radio exploded with chatter as the other pilots reported what they were seeing, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. Her attention was focused entirely on the lead ship of the spectral formation as it moved closer until she could see her own reflection in its liquid mercury surface. For just a moment, that surface cleared like a window, and she found herself looking into the cockpit of an F-105 Thunderchief that should have been wreckage in a Vietnamese jungle. Captain Michael Kowalski looked exactly as he had in his service. Photos. Young, confident, with the slight smile of a man who'd found his calling in the sky. But his eyes held depths that spoke of journeys beyond imagination, of wonders and horrors witnessed across the cosmos. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every mile he'd traveled, every star he'd passed in his long flight home. "Sarah. Chen," he said, and somehow she wasn't surprised that he knew her name. Granddaughter of Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, 355th Maintenance Squadron. He was a good man. Kept my bird flying through more missions than I had any right to survive. Michael's ghostly smile widened. "He told me about you, you know. Proudest grandfather in the Air Force he was. Said you were going to be something special." The impossibility of the conversation didn't register in Sarah's mind. Dead men didn't chat with their old crew chief's granddaughters 50,000 feet above the Nevada desert, but then again, dead men weren't supposed to master interstellar travel either. She found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. He talked about you too. Said you were the best pilot he ever worked with. Said you never came back." "I did come back," Michael replied, and his expression grew sad. "Just took a little longer than expected. 58 years, 4 months, and 16 days to be exact. But I'm here now, and I've got work to do. The question is, are you ready to help me finish it?" Before Sarah could answer, her world exploded into chaos. The radio frequencies erupted with overlapping transmissions as every military installation within 1,000 miles suddenly detected what appeared to be a massive aerial invasion. From Nellis to Peterson, from Cheyenne Mountain to the Pentagon, radar screens lit up with contacts that defied explanation. Not just the 7 ships surrounding Sarah, but hundreds more materializing out of thin air at locations across the globe. "Thunder Lead, this is NORAD Control," came an urgent transmission from Colorado. "We're tracking multiple unknown contacts worldwide. London, Tokyo, Sydney, they're everywhere. What's your status?" Sarah tried to respond, but found her voice caught in her throat as she witnessed something that would reshape her understanding of reality forever. Each of the 7 ships around her began to project holographic displays into the air. 3-dimensional maps of Earth showing the locations of every military pilot who had ever been listed as missing in action. The displays pulsed with different colors: red for those confirmed dead, blue for those still alive in captivity or hiding, and a heartbreaking gold for those lost in the spaces between worlds, transformed like Michael into something beyond human, understanding but still clinging to their duty, their honor, their desperate need to return home. There were thousands of them, thousands of golden dots scattered across the display like stars in a constellation of the lost. Pilots from World War II still flying ghostly formations over the Pacific, Korean War aces navigating the quantum foam between dimensions, Vietnam veterans like Michael who had learned to bend space and time to their will. Each one had been changed by their experience, evolved into something that could traverse the impossible distances between worlds, but at their core, they remained what they had always been, pilots trying to get back to base. "My God," Sarah breathed, staring at the holographic map. "How many of you are there?" "More than you might think." Michael's voice carried a weight of infinite sadness. "Less than there should be. War has a way of scattering people across time and space, Sarah. Some of us get lucky and find our way back. Others—" He gestured to the display, where several golden dots flickered and went dark as she watched. "Others get lost in the deep, black, forget who they were, what they were fighting for. They become something else entirely. Cosmic storms, gravitational anomalies, the kind of phenomena your scientists can't explain because they refuse to believe in the human soul's ability to survive anything." The implications of what she was seeing began to sink in, and Sarah felt her worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself in real time. Every unexplained atmospheric phenomenon, every UFO sighting dismissed by the military, every radar ghost that had puzzled air traffic controllers for decades, they were all coming home. The lost pilots of human history, transformed by forces beyond comprehension but still bound by the unbreakable code that said, "You never leave a man behind." "But why now?" she asked, her fingers unconsciously tightening on her flight controls as F-22s from 3 different squadrons maintained their nervous circle around the supernatural formation. "Why are you all returning now?" Michael's expression darkened, and for the first time since this impossible encounter began, Sarah saw fear in his eyes. "Because something's coming, Sarah. Something that makes every war humanity has ever fought look like a playground scuffle. We've seen it out there, moving between the stars, consuming entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty space where planets used to orbit." His ship moved closer, and she could feel the urgency radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Earth has maybe 6 months before it gets here. 6 months to prepare for a war that will determine whether your species survives or becomes just another footnote in the cosmic record." The holographic display suddenly zoomed out, showing not just Earth but the entire solar system. And Sarah gasped as she saw them. Dark shapes moving through the void beyond Pluto, massive beyond comprehension, their presence warping space itself, like stones dropped into still water. Whatever they were, they moved with purpose, with intelligence, and with a hunger that seemed to devour light itself. "The Devourers," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what we call them. They've been working their way through this spiral arm of the galaxy for millennia, and Earth is next on their menu. Your governments don't know, can't know, because they'd panic, start wars among themselves, waste precious time on politics, instead of preparation." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the scale of what she was being told. An alien invasion wasn't something covered in any Air Force manual she'd ever read. "What do you need from me?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "What can one pilot do against that?" Michael's smile returned, and this time it carried a hint of the cockiness that had made him a legend among his squadron. "Mates. One pilot? Nothing. But we're not talking about one pilot, Sarah. We're talking about every pilot who ever earned their wings, ever pushed the envelope, ever looked at the sky and saw not a limit but an invitation." The holographic display shifted again, showing flight paths that crisscrossed not just Earth's atmosphere, but the entire solar system. "We need someone to coordinate the living pilots while we handle the dead ones. Someone who understands both. The old ways of flying and the new technologies we've mastered out there in the dark." As if summoned by his words, Sarah's instrument panel erupted with new data streams, technical specifications for craft that existed outside the normal laws of physics, flight manuals for vehicles that could phase through solid matter or travel faster than light by folding space around them like origami. The information flowed into her consciousness with an ease that should have been impossible, as if her brain had been designed specifically to understand these alien concepts. "You're not the first pilot we've recruited," Michael continued, and Sarah noticed that several of the golden dots on the holographic display had begun moving, converging on locations around the globe. "But you're special, Sarah. Your grandfather wasn't just a crew chief, he was a conduit, someone who could communicate with us even when we were lost in the void. That ability runs in families, and you've got it stronger than anyone we've encountered in 50 years. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow as memories came flooding back. Times when she'd known exactly where other aircraft were even when they were beyond visual or radar range, moments when she'd felt the presence of other pilots, across impossible distances. The strange dreams she'd had since childhood of flying through star-filled skies in aircraft that didn't exist. She'd always assumed it was just imagination, the fantasies of a child who wanted to touch the stars. Now she realized it had been training. "The downloads you're receiving aren't random," Michael explained, watching her face as understanding dawned. "They're keyed specifically to your neural patterns, your unique ability to interface with both human technology and what we've learned out there. In 6 months, when the Devourers arrive, you'll be commanding the greatest air force in human history, living pilots flying conventional aircraft supported by the greatest aces who ever lived, now equipped with technology that can reshape reality itself." Sarah looked around at the F-22s still circling them, their pilots no doubt reporting everything they saw to increasingly frantic commanders. In a few hours, this encounter would trigger the largest military mobilization in human history. Scientists would be pulled from universities, engineers from corporate research labs. Every resource the planet possessed would be focused on understanding and preparing for what was coming. But even as she thought about the massive undertaking ahead, one question burned in her mind above all others. "What happened to you out there, Michael? How did you become this?" His expression grew distant, and for a moment she saw not the confident pilot but something older, sadder, infinitely more complex. "I died, Sarah, shot down over a jungle that might as well have been on another planet. But dying isn't the end for people like us. People who live to fly, who dream in 3 dimensions, who see the sky not as a ceiling but as an ocean waiting to be explored." The ship around him seemed to pulse with remembered pain, and Sarah realized she was seeing the physical manifestation of trauma transformed into purpose. "I fell through layers of reality I didn't know existed, learned to exist as pure consciousness navigating by starlight and intuition. Met others like me, pilots from every war humanity ever fought. All of us changed, but still fundamentally, what we'd always been. And slowly, over decades, we began to understand our purpose, which is to be the bridge between what humanity is and what it needs to become. Your species is about to face its greatest test, and you're going to need every advantage you can get. The Devourers have consumed civilizations millions of years older than yours, but they've never faced anything like what we're building. A fusion of human intuition, courage, and adaptability with technology that exists outside the normal constraints of physics." Michael's ship began to rise, and the other 6 fell into formation around him. The holographic display winked out, but not before Sarah memorized the locations where other recruitments were taking place. "Go back to your base, Sarah. File your report. Watch as your superiors try to explain away what you've seen. And when they can't, when the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore, remember that you have allies in places they can't imagine." As the ghostly formation climbed toward the stratosphere, Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders, like a flight suit tailored specifically for her. In 6 months, she would lead humanity's defense against an enemy beyond imagination. But first, she had to convince a world that didn't believe in ghosts that their salvation lay in the hands of the dead. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the war room buried 500 feet beneath Cheyenne Mountain, staring at a holographic display that would have been pure science fiction just 90 days ago. The room buzzed with activity as officers from every branch of the military worked alongside scientists, engineers, and, most remarkably, the translucent figures of pilots who had been dead for decades but now served as technical advisors for humanity's most desperate hour. The transformation had been swift and brutal. Within hours of her encounter over Nevada, similar events had occurred at military bases worldwide. Paris, Moscow, Beijing, Tel Aviv. Everywhere that nations maintained air forces, the ghostly squadrons had appeared with the same impossible message: prepare for war against an enemy that existed beyond human understanding, or watch civilization crumble into cosmic dust. The world's governments had tried to maintain secrecy at first, but you can't hide the return of the dead from families who had mourned them for half a century. When Martha Kowalski, now 83 and living in a Chicago nursing home, received a video call from her fiancé who had been shot down over Vietnam in 1967, the story broke wide open. Within days, CNN was running interviews with widows talking to husbands who had died in Korea, children meeting fathers they'd never known who had been lost over the Pacific in 1943. The revelation that death was not the end, that consciousness could survive and evolve beyond the physical body, had sent shockwaves through every religion, every philosophy, every assumption humanity had ever made about existence itself. Churches, emptied and filled in equal measure. Suicide rates plummeted as people realized that death might not be escape but transformation. Scientists abandoned decades of research to study phenomena that made quantum mechanics look like elementary arithmetic. But Sarah barely noticed the theological and social upheaval. Her world had narrowed to a single, terrifying focus. Preparing for an enemy that had consumed entire star systems and was now less than 3 months away from Earth. "Status report, Colonel," said General Patricia Morrison. No relation to Colonel Morrison, who had died 2 weeks ago when his heart couldn't handle the stress of humanity's new reality. The general was one of the few senior officers who had adapted quickly to their situation, partly because her own brother had been among the returning pilots, a P-51 Mustang pilot who had been shot down over Germany in 1944 and spent 79 years learning to navigate hyperspace. Sarah activated the holographic display, and the war room filled with a 3-dimensional map of the solar system. The approaching Devourer fleet showed as dark red blobs moving inexorably toward Earth, their presence warping space-time so severely that conventional physics broke down in their vicinity. "The enemy will reach the outer edge of our defensive perimeter in 73 days, she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was describing. Reconnaissance flights by our enhanced pilots indicate we're facing approximately 2,000 ships, ranging in size from destroyers equivalent to modern aircraft carriers to dreadnoughts that are larger than Manhattan." A murmur ran through the room as officers processed the scale of the approaching threat. Even with every military force on Earth united for the first time in human history, they were facing odds that would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so absolute. However, Sarah continued, and the display shifted to show the defensive formations they had been constructing throughout the solar system. Our situation isn't as hopeless as those numbers suggest. Thanks to the technology provided by our veteran advisors, we've been able to construct weapons and defensive systems that operate on principles the Devourers have never encountered. The hologram showed what looked like a vast spider web, stretching between Earth and Mars, a network of gravitational mines that could fold space around enemy ships, crushing them into singularities. Near Jupiter, massive generators tapped directly into the planet's magnetic field, creating weapons that fired coherent streams of charged particles capable of punching through matter at the quantum level. And throughout the asteroid belt, camouflaged, manufacturing facilities, staffed by the living and supervised by the dead, produced fighter craft that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing them to attack from angles that didn't technically exist in normal space-time. Our primary advantages are threefold, Sarah explained, pointing to different elements of the display. First, tactical flexibility. The Devourers have conquered through overwhelming force and superior technology, but they've never faced an enemy that includes soldiers who exist outside the normal constraints of physical reality. Our enhanced pilots can scout their formations without being detected, sabotage their ships from dimensions they can't perceive, and coordinate attacks across impossible distances. She highlighted a series of training exercises that had taken place over the past month, simulated battles where living pilots in conventional aircraft had worked in perfect coordination with ghostly squadrons flying craft that bent reality around them like putty. The results had been extraordinary. Formations that should have been impossible to maintain became fluid, organic things that responded to threats faster than any computer could calculate. Pilots who had never flown together performed maneuvers that required telepathic levels of coordination, guided by the enhanced awareness that came from having advisors who existed partially outside of time. Second, we have the element of surprise. The Devourers expect resistance based on the technological level they can observe. They see our satellites, our conventional military forces, our industrial capacity, and they calculate the threat accordingly. They don't know about our enhanced capabilities because they exist in frequencies they can't detect. As far as they're concerned, they're approaching a planet full of primitive primates with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that humanity's greatest advantage came from soldiers who had been written off as casualties, whose families had been told they were missing and presumed dead. The bureaucratic classifications that had caused so much heartbreak for military families had now become the cornerstone of Earth's defense. The dead had been forgotten by official records, which meant they could operate without the Devourers, ever knowing they existed. Third, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, we're fighting for something they don't understand. The Devourers consume civilizations, but they've never encountered a species where the dead refuse to stay dead, where soldiers separated by decades and continents can form bonds stronger than death itself. Every pilot we've lost has become a force multiplier. Every squadron that was shot down has regrouped in dimensions beyond their understanding. We're not just defending Earth. We're defending the principle that consciousness, courage, and loyalty can survive anything the universe throws at us. The display shifted one final time, showing the formations that would meet the Devourer fleet when it arrived. Living pilots flying the most advanced aircraft human technology could produce, supported by ghostly wings of veterans who had mastered technologies beyond current understanding. P-51 Mustangs that could phase through solid matter flying alongside F-22 Raptors equipped with weapons that fired crystallized space-time. Korean War Aces in F-86, Sabres that could travel faster than light escorting modern bombers carrying payloads that would make nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. Questions, Sarah asked, though she knew most of the officers in the room were still struggling to process the reality of their situation. Fighting a conventional war against a human enemy was complex enough. Fighting a multi-dimensional conflict, alongside the spirits of dead pilots using technology that shouldn't exist, was beyond anything military academies had ever prepared them for. General Morrison stood, her expression grim but determined. Colonel Chen, I want a straight answer. In your professional opinion, what are our chances? Sarah looked around the room at the faces of living officers and the translucent forms of pilots who had died for their countries and returned to serve again. She thought of Michael Kowalski, who had spent 58 years in the void between stars and never forgotten his duty to protect his wingmen. She thought of her grandfather, who had believed in the impossible and lived to see his granddaughter, chosen to lead humanity's greatest battle. Ma'am, she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had seen death conquered and reality rewritten, I honestly believe we're going to surprise the hell out of them. The Devourers have consumed 1,000 civilizations, but they've never fought the human race. They've never faced an enemy where death is just another duty station, where pilots who died at Midway can fly formation with aces from Vietnam, where love and loyalty transcend the boundaries between life and death. She gestured to the holographic display, where the combined forces of the living and the dead prepared for humanity's greatest test. They're about to learn why you never pick a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose, especially when they've learned to turn death itself into a tactical advantage. Outside, in the Colorado sky, formations of aircraft practiced maneuvers that would have been impossible just months ago. F-35 Lightning II jets flew in perfect synchronization with ghostly P-40 Warhawks, their pilots communicating through channels that existed beyond radio waves, beyond the physical constraints that had once defined aerial combat. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and for the first time since the Devourers had been detected, Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't dared to hope for: the possibility that when the shooting started, the universe was going to discover that death had only made humanity's finest pilots stronger.